I think people here will be interested in hearing about your career before your filmmaking career. Let's talk a little bit about, because I've been doing some reading obviously, and I know that music, film, art was something that was very important to you from a very early age. I just wondered if you could talk about what kind of direction that interest took and what were your kind of some of your earliest influences growing up, and whether those disciplines provided a refuge for you in any way. You know, was it something that you got into to get out of something else? Was it, or just immediately hooked by it?
Suddenly I feel like the guy in the movie. Well...
Hopefully I'll get 50 quid at the end.
I'm feeling a little bit nervous. Well, I think it's, you know, when you're a kid kind of running around or whatever you do, you know, and certain things just made me feel very alive, particularly music in the beginning, particularly hearing things on the radio and sort of just thinking there was this extraordinary thing just appearing in the room, and I wasn't sure how. I still don't, actually. When I'm working, I sort of go like, wait a minute, this isn't real, this is on a screen or something. It's just, you know, extraordinary, really, and it really got me. And I'd listen to sort of these things on the radio and sort of speak to my parents about how's this made. And then my dad would sort of bring me some things that he made from like wood blocks and all this sort of stuff to make the sounds like. I remember Elvis, show my age now, Elvis Presley's It's Now or Never. There's a little sort of a Clegg thing, and my dad sort of made me a pen. I could play along with it, you know. I just it's this other extraordinary world that seemed to exist outside of the everyday, which I still kind of believe is magical in some way. And then, of course, that graduated into sort of seeing images on television. They'd been invented by then. And they were sort of moving around, and the music was accompanying it. And then it became this other thing. It was almost like this third dimension of magic was going on, where emotions seemed to be being expressed outside of people talking to each other through this medium of music. And so I'd sort of run home, you know, frantically after school to try and catch whatever was on, and things like the Avengers. And I just found them to be unbelievable, and in Manchester I just sort of believed that all this was happening in London. I must get there, you know, one day. So really, from quite an early age, I was kind of plugged into the idea of where music could possibly come from, how it was made, why it was made, what it was doing, what its function was, how it was sort of fitting to these images that I saw on the television, and on from there really.
And from the interest in images on the television, how did because you've always been known as a bit of a cineast, and we'll come on to that and how that influenced your music, but how did your interest in cinema begin? What were some of the kind of filmmakers that first kind of acted as an inspiration?
Well, I don't know, maybe it's like that's big television then, I think. So, so that you were able to go and see the thing bigger and more sort of direct, And I guess I was, a teenager in the 70s, so I started to see these great, I mean, it was, now of course we know it to be the golden age of filmmaking, so, I would see the things that were being made at the time, and just really sort of drink them in, I suppose. I can remember the first time I saw Taxi Driver, and just being absolutely astonished. I didn't know things like that happened in the world, I suppose. I mean, I can't, I'm not totally naive, but just, just the way it was played out, from this man's sort of mind, and this diary that they kept of what was going on, and his isolation, and his sort of, the way he dealt with that, and I just, found things like extraordinary, and then that takes you to, well, what else has Scorsese done? And then you're sort of, trying to get everything he's ever done, and then you see also that that's associated with other directors. And so it was the Americans, and then moving into Europe to the French directors, all sort of kind of commercial really at that stage. I wasn't sort of so underground, and I wasn't so sort of arty about it really.
And in turn, you said you grew up in the 70s. Obviously, your kind of first, you briefly studied graphic design, I think, at Stockport, and then obviously the punk movement happened, and from then your kind of involvement with magazine took off. I wonder if you could just take us through, because I'm sure for a lot of people here looking at the Age of the Audience magazine is one of those seminal bands. I got into them through my brother, who's older than me. But how did the opportunity to to Join magazine come about? And as I said, how influential was this whole punk spirit to you?
Well, that was really the wake-up call, and also, if you like, the entry ticket to being able to participate and create as well, because I kind of resigned that I was quite good at drawing, and I kind of resigned myself to the fact that I could probably be a designer in some way, and I thought if I could if I pushed myself into those areas, but still this other thing was going on, and so I didn't last very long, really. I got about 9 months and a couple of projects, and then saw I think it was Buzzcocks and The Fall, and Susie and the Banshees and Penetrate, and just saw all these bands over a weekend or something, and that was it. I just sort of bravely sort of walked into the front room and went, I think you better sit down. There's something I need to tell you. And
You probably wondered what you was going to tell them.
I know. And I said, oh, what? You're going to be a punk rock bass player? That's it. Is that it? Oh, fine. Go on then. I think I think my parents were actually quite concerned that that's what I was going to do, because it didn't seem to be any career for anybody at that stage. And then I joined a magazine. I had an amazing bit of good fortune in that I bumped into a guy from school who said, you come to my house, my brother's got all these instruments. So we went to his house, there was like a few guitars, a drum kit, a few basses and all that. And he said, see this bass, you can have it. And I said, what? Have it? And he said, yeah, just take it. It had 2 strings on it. I went to buy the other 2 strings to make it the 4, and there was an advert from Howard Devoto. So, and I knew he'd just left Buzzcocks, and I was like, wow, what's we going to do next? And there was this advert for musicians. So I took down the number, stayed up all night playing the other 2 strings, made the phone call, and he said, yeah, come down in the afternoon. And I sat there playing this song, The Light Pours Out of Me. He said, I've got this song called The Light Pours Out of Me. So he started strumming this E chord. And I couldn't really play, so I just played the E note. There's just one note all the way through. Touch, as they say, because I just kept this one note going, and he went, yeah, that sounds great, you're in. And I was like, okay. And he goes, I've got this other one called Shot by Both Sides. Is that the time already? I've got to go. I'll come back next week, and we'll do Shot by Both Sides then. So, next thing I was rehearsing with Howard, I think it was a drummer, and John McGeoch was at University painting. And so he wasn't around for a little bit, and then that was it. We were sort of off on this thing of trying to get a record deal, and we thought we were really great. We had some things going, and there was this whole thing about being different to everybody else, and we thought we were carrying the next thing after punk on and all. So it's a very sort of very enjoyable and great time. But I'd catch myself. We'd be making records, and everyone would go to bed. And I go, yeah, good night, 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 night. And then wait till they'd all gone. And then look around this room, there's all these instruments everywhere. So I get my little cassette player out, go over to the keyboard and do something over there. And then the guitar, and I was just making these noises, and I remember making this sort of mini album at 4 o'clock in the morning called The Man in the Hat. And I just kept hold of this little thing, and it was a score, I was kind of scoring something. So the film thing was still sort of, edging itself in there, but I was also sort of consumed with being a teenager, being part of this movement, part of what was going on now, and this is what we were doing. It was fantastic.
And then, of course, after, sorry to make this into a whistle-stop to your early music career, but after magazine, of course, Nick Clegg and the Bad Seeds. Now, you probably know Nick Clegg is one of the Cinecity patrons. He's our main patron. He lives down in Hove. He's normally here, but he's on tour at the moment.
No, I was going to make a joke. Ladies and gentlemen.
Well, he does a lot for the festival.
I'm sure.
He's a good guy. He's a bit too tall for me. But he, you referred to your period in Nick Clegg and the Bad Seeds as your black and blue period.
Yeah, I went through a sort of, if you say, like, I suppose, experimental phase, and I was the experiment, and I was the lab technician, And I was, you know, I was out of my teens then, early 20s, trying to find a place in the world, you know, who I was, and nothing seemed to fit, nothing seemed to be right. You know, I'd gone from this sort of ideas of, you know, possible optimism, and then what really, and you know, Nick's made a fantastic career, uncompromised, and I just think that's just absolutely fantastic. And it was a bit like, you know, I still felt quite young, and all the other people around me were quite older, and so I was kind of learning. I was sort of like, you know, you know, how did we, you know, and I didn't really know. I'd never met an Australian person for starters, and there was a bunch of them, and they had this way about them, and it was all very interesting. And I, you know, I was sort of flailing myself around to see what I had and what I could bring to the table, and I kind of, you know, I took that on board, if you like, and it cost me, but I at the end of the day, I'm sort of quite looking back. I think some of those early Bad Seeds records are fantastic. I just think they're out there. They're sort of somewhere else. And but then I sort of, you know, got myself into a few scrapes, as it were, and a little bit of a pickle, whole jar actually, and sort of thought, you know, maybe this isn't so good. And I kept going back to Manchester during, you know, Bad Seeds marathon sessions, and then go back for a rest to Manchester, and I'd do the thing again with the little cassette player. And but it was all very an awful time. You know, there was illness in the family. My immediate family were literally dropping like flies over a 3-year period. I lost my dad, my mum, and my sister. You know, and all I could do was write frantically. And by now, I had 2 cassette players, so I was putting one in the other and recording it, and then putting one back. You know, and just this obsessive sort of thing to try and get whatever grief was going on out of me. And that sort of became an outpouring of stuff, and also, you know, I just knew that if I didn't stop sort of, you know, being I suppose they call it a hellraiser, I didn't stop that hellraising, then, you know, quite possibly I was going to go to the same place. So, you know, it was the biggest point of change, really, in my whole life, was to sort of like, you know, okay, so what's going to happen now? Where are you going to go now? And I just knew that the film thing was now the time to get stuck in.
Well, you musically, I mean, you started to experiment. I think you did a single and an EP, and then you brought out this, and I've actually bought my original copy along Moss Side Story.
Yeah.
And I've always been touched. I mean, it's like a film poster in a black and white world. Murder brings a touch of colour, which I've always thought was such a great tagline for anything. And this is for me a very important record because the way it used sampling and the way it kind of was disparate styles. I think one of the things that defines your work is there is this fusion of styles. There's a jazz thing going on. There's more recently with Rag and Bone, which I think we hear briefly in Therapist. There's a kind of dub reggae thing. But there's also always been, you mentioned Taxi Driver, there's always been kind of a Bernard Herrmann orchestral strain to your work as well. And I think Moss Side Story came out at a time for me, you know, you're looking for something new, what's happening that's new, and it just kind of encapsulated all of that. But as I said with the tagline, it did always have this very strong cinematic element, and I know that all the reviews, and I don't know if it became an albatross around your neck, kept talking about it. It became this idea of a soundtrack that existed only in your imagination, and you became the soundtrack guy for films that didn't actually exist, which I guess was fine for a while. But you know, this outpouring, you said you had this grief going on. I mean, it is quite a remarkable record, isn't it, Moss Side Story? I mean, did all of this stuff come together? Did you know that you were creating something that was fairly unique and stood alone?
Well, I think this is where I can't sort of, you know, I don't want to downplay at all the fact that the people I'd worked with were making, as far as I could see, pretty important music. Both bands I'd been in, and so the pressure, if you like, creatively, which was a good pressure, was to do something that was going to make you stand out, do something that was going to give you something else, you know, from what was going on. So, yeah, that was very much still a kind of, you know, a punk idea, you know, punk ideal. And so this idea of a soundtrack, it was almost like, what could I do, really? You can't write music to a film unless you've written music to a film, it seemed. So it was sort of like this, you know, catch-22 situation. So I thought, well, I've got plenty of movies going on in here, so let's just write anyway. You know, and in, you know, where I was at the time in Moss Side, there was a history, and there was something that was happening right on the spot, which, you know, you could almost like walk down the street and, you know, wait being played out before your very eyes. You know, all the stuff of movies, you know, murder, mayhem, people you talked to last night were gunned down the next day, and there was stuff like the history of people from the Caribbean that had moved there, and the way life had changed from your door being open to anybody that walked past that could walk in and sit down and eat with you, to just firmly shut. And I was sort of like noticing this movement, because I'd go away, I'd be, you know, just doing this, you know, traveling around the thing, and then come back and see how the things were shifting. So it's pretty much like watching a movie. So I thought, I'll score that, if you like. And also I was kind of armed with this idea of like, you know, you can do something. You work with people who push, you know, all the time. So I was kind of in, you know, that's inspiring to me. So and plus, yeah, I was caught up in all this emotional stuff. So I felt like I had all the right ingredients to put something.
And of course, you know, after doing soundtracks for imaginary movies, you got the opportunity to do soundtracks for real ones. You worked on a film, I think it was Delusion, and then Derek Jarman used some of your work for The Last of England, and then from that you went on to work with Oliver Stone, Alison Anders, probably most importantly, and I'm sure we'll come on to him as a seminal figure for you, David Lynch. You worked on Lost Highway. How did you find that career as a composer? How did you find the jump from doing the scores in your head to doing the real scores on screen? And what, again, you know, we mentioned Bernard Herrmann, Lalo Schifrin, and John Barry. These are other composers that I kind of see in your work. Were these people that you were kind of looking at and referencing in your own work that you were doing?
Yeah, because I think I was trying to learn the language of cinema in terms of music, and then put my own spin on how I perceived it. But then, of course, you know, the greats are great for a reason, and so you can, you know, always sort of pull stuff. And plus, there's music there that's just absolutely astonishing and breathtaking. And you know, it's that thing of doing what you do, and like you say, some of the stuff that was around Moss Side Story opened quite a few doors, you know. And also, I think I don't know if it's arrogance or whatever to just, you know, like, well, there's a film school, you know, without a film, could be seen as like mad. But people, I mean, in America, people that I spoke to certainly went, can't wait to see the film. That's great. Moss Side, what is a Moss Side? You know, and all that sort of stuff. But it opened a few doors. I mean, I found it quite incredible the first time I went to America off the back of that. I was sat in Francis Ford Coppola's office, and they were putting Dracula together. And they said, yeah, we heard this thing on the radio this morning. You sound like the guy. I was like, what do you mean, the guy? Well, you know, we got Dracula coming out, and we're looking for somebody to handle that. You think you can handle that? Yeah, sure. What is it? Well, you think you can work a 96-piece orchestra? So like an idiot, I went, no. You know, and of course I should have said, what? Is that all? 96. Throw in the other 4, you've got a deal. You know, I mean, I was just, no. No. I mean, you know, it was kind of a scary prospect. And then when I did see the movie, I thought, oh, thank God they got that guy. It sounds great. But, you know, and I was really enjoying that. I was enjoying being a part of that. I was enjoying you know, my little bit of 15 minutes of Hollywood stuff. And I got to work with some great people in the independent world, which was really good. I really liked them, and I, you know, brought that back to sort of what I was doing. But it's strange, that Moss Side Story thing, because it started another thing of like my own carry-on from the Bad Season magazine to make more albums, not necessarily in the same vein. Maybe Soul Murder was an extension of that, but then sort of go off and to be doing that as well as the films. So I had this no surprise, like dual identity thing going on at the same time. I've kind of continued to do that.
But the music's always been very eclectic, as I said, you know, it works across various styles. I think Soul Murder was nominated for the Mercury Music Prize, wasn't it? It's one of the... But also, you know, people again that know your work, there was always the kind of music promos that you did had a very distinct film element, particularly film noir. I remember one of your promos, I think, was the first on-screen performance from Minnie Driver.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, and you know, and there was always this element going on. So as we finally come to therapists, I think people that have followed your career wouldn't be too surprised that you've kind of moved behind the camera.
True.
But it took longer, perhaps, than some people would have thought. Why did you decide? You know, what were the elements that came together to make Therapist the first thing that you would make as a filmmaker, and not just as a director, but you edited, scored, wrote.
To be honest, it's some of it's the technology, really. I mean, I've been writing things for a while, and then just sort of how do you? It's the same thing, really, as starting to score things. You know, how do you get from there? How do you get from there to there? You know, when you've got to have all funding and you've never done it before, and I didn't really have any schooling, and I thought I was too far along to do all that. But I had some ideas, and really I just watched over a very short period of time, you know, like big productions with all this machinery to a handheld camera. You know, that's what's really happened. And I thought, you know, like I do with my work, you know, I'd go to a room of mine and put a few things together, you know, and then, you know, get some of the guys in it who had the brilliance to it, and then just put it out. I thought it'd be pretty good to try and do that with a film. And as I've, you know, been working in terms of albums, why don't I do a film that's like as long as an album-ish, and do the album as well, and put them both out as a little thing so people can enjoy the film. And I also, you know, with Therapists, hopefully there's a few ingredients in there that you might like check out again and go like, what the hell was going on there? And have it like you would an album and sort of play it again. So that's the idea, really. So it's almost like the next sort of place to.
Cinema is like that idea, because it means you're asking people to pay twice, so we're quite happy with the idea of check it out again. I mean, in terms of the themes in the film, it does come back to some of the, I wouldn't use the word obsessions, but the idea of trauma is central.
Use that word.
I'll use that word. The idea of trauma coming back from the past. You've always spoken about your interest, which is a very noir-esque idea of illusion versus reality. I think that's something that's
the main
in there, the kind of doppelganger thing. You know, these kind of really come to fruition, I think, in Therapists, from music to kind of more visual. How did you attempt to establish these ideas in a visual sense? What approach did you take in that regard?
Well, that was the challenge, really. I don't know how successful I've been, but I started off with I wanted to do this noirish story that really tried to put out there from the inside out, if you like, this sort of conundrum of inner world doubleness. So I thought, well, if I can set the whole thing up from the beginning, so right from the titles off, you've got literally somebody splitting in two, to a man sat there in a dark room with light on one side and dark on the other, opening something where he has to go inside. So all of these, I was just working these ideas of symbolism and metaphor and things that I really love in movies, and a sort of hidden language, if you like, to try and tell a story. And obviously over the years I've sort of picked up certain things of how you do that and how you write in sort of image systems and subplots into the thing, but it was very difficult. You know, I catch myself going at times, and to try and sort of explain this idea of, because really it's just a straightforward revenge tragedy. You know, I mean, I'd sort of jot down notes like Shamlet, you know, and sort of then what are the ingredients in the revenge tragedy? You know, what did the guy that inspired Shakespeare, Seneca, what did he say? He was the originator of the revenge tragedy. You know, why are you going this way of of hesitancy and not sort of cold and with purpose in the revenge. Why are you stalling? Why? And so, you know, and that, all of that was sort of real fun to get to grips with. And like you say, like I said, you never know if you've been successful with that until you sit with an audience and it's played out.
We'll find out. I'll just ask two more quick questions if I can.
Sure.
The film has a lot of, I think has fun, the fact that it is very cine-literate. You know, we were talking upstairs in the bar, there's the Mulholland Drive poster, there's the Sight and Sound covers where you see To Catch a Thief, because the film has a Hitchcock element, and obviously there's another Lynch cover, there's Steve McQueen, Bergman. You know, did you want to kind of have a little bit of fun with that as well, and sort of say to people, well, here's some kind of little clues for you to pick up on?
Well, people that have seen the film, a lot of people, you know, comment about the darkness and really what's going on in the film and where it's coming from. But for me, there are these elements of light. You know, it's like the aspect that makes me sort of smile is that there's this guy going to sort of, if you like, pick at this scab that's going to uncover all of this stuff. And his guns, if you like, are movies. So he's getting his thing together to go and do that. And even when he sat in the same room as the other guy, funny today, I sort of sat there sort of thinking like, it's quite funny that they're sort of using this bizarre language to talk to each other rather than just this plain language. So it's like this strange little investigation. And I find those things quite entertaining. Even though there is a lot of sort of darkness surrounding the piece. But yeah, they were good. They were like little kind of jigsaws and puzzles to work through.
I think seeing the film on the big screen is important, because I think what really comes across is the attention that you play to the audio, the sound. You know, you mentioned, and I don't know if that's partly due to your musician background, but you said about the fun aspect. You know, you have the sound at the start, the kind of ping pong ball going backwards and forwards, and you know there is a lot going on in the sound that does kind of disorientate viewers, and it feels like a bit of an assault in a good way. You know, we talked about David Lynch, Gaspar Noé would be somebody else that I think has a similar approach. Did you want people to kind of, you sort of said, you know, want to see it again, and, you know, but did you want people to kind of feel, well, I'm not sure how I feel about that, because it's not something that's immediately palatable, is it? It kind of, you have to think about it.
Not at all, and to be honest, it's taken me a while to accept when I sort of go, what do you think? You know, and it's happened quite a lot to me now in the last few months. Some people haven't even been able to respond, or I've given them the movie, and the next time I see them, they've sort of gone. So anyway, did you see the match between, and they've never mentioned it again, like ever. And I said to my friend Nick over there, who I'm meeting tomorrow, I said, well, I hope I see you tomorrow, you know, maybe I'll see you tomorrow. You know, this is the kind of response it's been getting. And it's taken me a while to, that usual thing, like with music all day, you go, oh yeah, I really like, oh, that bit, oh yeah. But that's not really the response, and I'm happy now to accept that what's going on for the central character in the film, it's fucking irritating for him, because he's trying to find out this thing. So in the same way that revenge tragedies an irritant, so is this at times. And you know, and I remember like the scene where he's turning over the letters, but you can't see him turning over the letters, you just see his face. I remember that going on for 10 minutes. I'm thinking that right. And because I'm a new filmmaker, somebody walked in my studio and went, that's too long. I went, okay. Just cut. I thought, ugh, should have just left it and made it, you know, like. But so I'm kind of finding that now that is actually where it does pitch, you know. It's not about sort of did you enjoy it. It's sort of, you know, if you got something from it, then fabulous. But I know it's not a sort of one of, it's no. People say to me like, so what kind of film is it? You know, and I sort of, I'm quiet for about half an hour, and then they go, well, wait, it's an action film? Well, if somebody says, how are you feeling, and they say, fine, and then the other person says, what F-I-N-E, feeling in need every day, and then there's a Mexican standoff. If that's action, then it's an action, and they go, oh, so it's a comedy then, you know, and I'm like, no, not really. It's quite hard to sort of explain. I'm just sort of doing this thing, you know. And what's been great, that the first few months was horrible. I mean, I think I sent it out to like 15 industry people, and not one of them came back. And then there was a slow sort of filtering of like, yeah, very Hitchcock, yeah, great, anyway. And then nothing. And now I've gotten quite used to that as being the thing, you know, I sort of, it is important to see it on a big screen.
Yeah,
it actually works best there.
Yeah.
And I get that that's what you're doing. When you're working this big for most of the time, you know, that's you kind of go doing this thing, but that's where it works best. And I think with people, you know, I've always subscribed to the idea of sitting in the dark with total strangers is the best way to experience, you know, anything that's a moving image. So.
Well, let's find out what people. We've got time for some questions, so please don't be shy. Has anybody got any questions for Barry about the film or about music or? Oh yeah, somebody right at the front. There's no microphone roving, so.
Yeah, not so much a question, but just I thought that was amazing.
Thank you.
For your first film in general. Yeah, sort of. Lots of things to say really on it. Probably won't say. Where can I get it?
You can get it in. It's coming out in January, the end of January, and like I said, it'll be like a DVD and a score. CD, that's sort of one package really available from Central Control. The trailer is going to go up in December, so if you look on the centralcontrol.co.uk website or just barryadamson.com, there'll be information about it there.
Was it sort of in part inspired by Inland Empire?
Can people hear at the back, by the way?
Not really.
Okay, the next part of the question was. The first part was saying how much she liked the film, which is good, which is nice. Where can you get the film? Well, you heard the answer. The next part of the question is, was it inspired by Inland Empire?
In part.
With the script being inside of the film.
I didn't know that. I've seen the film once, Inland Empire. I thought it was extraordinary. I thought the sound was extraordinary. I think I have a kind of Lynchian vibe anyway. I remember when I worked with him, he sent me a script for Lost Highway, and he called me up and said, I'm sending you this script because I just listened to you on West Side Story for 10 hours. I was like, yeah, okay. And he said, what do you think of the script? And I said, this blew me away. It's right up your alley, huh? So I think there's a like-mindedness there. So without really absorbing or studying Inland Empire, I probably nicked loads of it without even realising.
I mean, I saw that. Maybe it's to do with all these dualities.
Yeah, okay, yeah. And worlds within each other, yeah.
Maybe it just naturally.
Right.
Okay, there was somebody else put their hand up near the front. Yeah. All right. Oh, yeah. Okay. We'll come to you next. I promise.
How do you go about using like the synth sounds and the different special effects you used on the soundtrack? Yeah.
Sure.
Thank you. That was quite a loud voice. Did everybody hear that? Yeah. Excellent.
Well, it's funny because I used to work on, you know, scoring stuff, and you had to be. I had this job where I would work on television doing a cop show, and you had to sort of score like 18 pieces of music every weekend. So you have to like think on your feet really fast. So what I wanted to do, because I was making this, you know, with nobody sort of saying that's going to be done by Monday, I thought, well, I can either sort of sit back leisurely for a year and go like, no, try the next one, try the next one. And there was a little bit of that, but when I caught myself doing that, I'd go like, ooh. And so I tried to use if you like, a discipline to actually find what works for that, not what, you know, actually do the job. And because I think the great thing about putting sounds to picture is it's almost like, you know, it tells you what it was, and you start to sort of work with it, you know. So that was another thing of great fun, actually. I did sort of change quite a few things because it was almost developed. I was editing and doing the music at the same time. So I'd be sort of down here and then suddenly look back over there and go, oh, no, that's not going to work at all, you know. And so I was like moulding the thing, which you never get to do, you know. That was fantastic. And I'd go, God, if only that shot was 2 seconds long. I can make the shot, you know, I can make it 2 seconds longer and fit that bit of music that I've been working on. So it's a thing of like just processing it, and some things where you think, oh, I've got this great idea to do this thing, it just doesn't work at all. So it's half and half really, of half the things that you gravitate towards and half of it dictating to you what it needs. You know.
Okay, there was somebody right in the back. You're going to have to be really loud. Good luck. Oh, excellent.
Can you hear me?
Sorry?
I found the film, the way it was shot, was it was like a musical composition. So
Yeah.
I'm interested to know, had you written the score
Right.
before you kind of approached the filming, or as you were directing the scenes,
Mhm.
did you have that music going on in your head?
Mhm.
I'm just interested in
Okay.
the relationship between you as a composer and becoming a director and setting up the scenes.
Right. I guess that carries on from your question a bit, because I forgot about this. Just before, I think about maybe a month before shooting, I was looking through the script, and I remember the scene of the mirror, the spitting on the self-image, and whatever it is. And I started to write some music for that, because I had an idea about that. And I played it to the actress on the set, because I'd sort of read somewhere that's happened. I thought, oh, that'd be good. Here's some music I've written already. But then, as I was saying to the last gentleman over here, it kind of evolved while I was doing the editing, most of it. Some of it was there already, and then some of it I approached people and said to them, can I use your, like you would do in a movie, can I use your song for this bit? Because I really liked that thing. So I had a few ideas about there's a composer in Poland called Clegg, who makes these records, which are sort of, I guess they're called industrial, but he just sits at home in his mum's basement making this horrendous, strange noise, I think he does this thing where he dips them in oil or something before they come out, because when they arrive at your house, you go, what's that smell? It's oil, you know. But some of the stuff he does is just unbelievable, and so I took some of that, gave him a call, actually went and saw him and said, look, you know, I'd love to use that. So that was kind of fun as well, because it meant I was sort of expanding my own palette, if you like, of musical sounds, things I couldn't do. The sort of the flashback stuff as well is from a composer in Switzerland, and he was very gracious in offering me this piece of music, which I think is him sort of screaming at the loudest decibels of ever into a microphone, which I would never do. It was great to work with those other pieces of music. So the whole thing was kind of evolving. Some of it was before, and like I said, then I'd have to go back and redo some things because the flow was just not right at all.
In terms of collaboration, when you spoke about this, I mean, you did well to get David Hayman. I mean, David Hayman's an actor that people probably recognise, very, very accomplished actor. Was that at all nerve-wracking for yourself, as somebody that was making something for the first time, working with somebody that was kind of a veteran? How was that process for you? Was it easy? Did he make it easy for you, or was he a hard taskmaster?
He was a bit pissed off that I changed the script at the last minute. What you changed it for? I said, well, I'm trying to make it better. But he was great. He was very giving. He was very, he knew where it was at. I mean, he could have had me, what's the expression? Over
Barrel.
Yeah, over the proverbial barrel, many times. But he was very kind and very sort of like, and right at the end, he just sort of pulled me to one side and went, "You're a natural. Do some more," and then hopped off in his car. But it was great to see him sort of like doing his stuff, kind of showing off in front of everybody. And then, I had to sort of step in sometimes and be a director and go, and being a first timer, I'd done my homework. I had notes like this, I had drawings everywhere, and I had very specific things about delivery, and I had very specific ways that actors work, and I know they work, and I had very specific things I needed him to do. So I had to sort of like put all that stuff aside and then go in there and go like, okay, David, that's good, but and I'd had sort of some practice at communication, from productions in music. We do that all the time. We sort of go like, what do you think? I'm doing another one. Oh yeah, well, but why do another one? because this. So it was good to be able to have that. But he was a sweetheart, darling. He was great. And his experience was invaluable.
Fantastic. Okay, we do have time probably for a couple more questions before, so if anybody has one, this is your opportunity. Or are you going to go shy? Anybody? Oh, the same. Go on then.
This guy that you were just talking about,
David, yeah.
He was a therapist,
Yeah.
Yeah, I was curious. I was going to ask, I was thinking, shortly into the film, what you had said to him. What was his manner? He had a very particular manner to him that made me think he wasn't a therapist.
Mm-hmm.
And then, sort of as the film progressed, that became a bit clearer, that he was maybe some kind of gangster. Like, oh, that's what I was thinking.
Mm-hmm.
So I was curious about his manner, whether that was something that he had derived from the script, or
Yeah.
something that you had told him. It seemed
Right.
like you knew something.
Yeah, well, you have a discussion about. See, my idea was that we all, a therapist is this person who's kind and good and helps you on your way and whatever, I guess. But obviously the bad guy is the good guy, supposedly the good guy. So I set up a whole thing that, a lot of it is just in the language and the dialogue, and this is some of the stuff I was changing, and we discussed like whether like up front, I remember up front it used to be like, okay, he was making this call to this guy and saying like, well listen, get here at 10 to 8 because I need you to do something, and then, funny enough, Bradley at Central Control said to me, but that's like you might just be calling a receptionist. And then I actually worked with a French screenwriter who'd made something like 23 films, and I sort of said, would you have a look at this? And they said, well, if you go in the way of Hitchcock, why not do a Hitchcock thing straight off? And have him sort of say, like, I'm going to, and then, so, through the movie, you kind of know what's going to happen, and you kind of know what he doesn't know. I actually know now that I didn't pull it off, because you've got to put more, perhaps if it was a feature, I could have done it, like, more suspense, more sort of like setups of like, oh my God, it's going to happen now. He's going to get him now. He's just going to. And I couldn't really play that. There's a couple of sections where he keeps him there, like by being kind and good all of a sudden. So we didn't really discuss that. But it's funny because David kind of picked up on that a little bit and sort of came in with this way of speaking. I said, no, just be who you are, but let's look at your background, where you've come from. You've obviously been, by the picture, you've been in Africa. There's this other stuff that's gone on. But just be yourself and know that you've got a problem. How are you going to deal with this problem? It's an irritant, again. Another irritant that he has to deal with, which makes you kind of narky a bit. Even though you're going like, yeah, really good to see you. So we talked about that, really, as the way of shaping the character. I say we got about like 10 minutes to do that, because of the way it is.
Just to close, you said that David at the end, before he swept away in his car, sort of said, you're a natural, do some more. What are your plans for? Are there plans for a feature? Plans for more short pieces? What's next for Barry Ellis and filmmaker?
Well, I'm working on a couple of scripts at the moment, and one I was going to sort of do a similar thing again, like an album, a film album, and then somebody stopped me and said, "No, you've done that. You've done that now. You need to make a feature now." Next, a writer actually who lives here, and he said to me like, "Well, I'll maybe we could do something, and I'll help you." And I said, that'd be fantastic. And he was very sort of encouraging about it, because I thought, well, maybe do a bunch of shorts and maybe a bunch, and then do. No. You did that in like 6 days, and you can convince people that you're worthy of the budget. Just do it. So that's been my next thing. And I was given, maybe this is how it works in the world of magic. I was literally kind of handed an idea over the summer, which sort of I saw as like beginning, middle, and end over 90 odd minutes, And so I'm busy kind of. Actually, in the middle of an album, a conventional Barry Ellis album, if you like, which is coming to its end now, and that'll be out probably in April or May. And so, as soon as I get that done, I get back on the script of Casa Diablo.
Just remember, beginning, middle and end, it doesn't have to be in that order.
No,
God will tell you that.
Well, the end's written.
Yeah. So if you want to find out more about Barry Adamson, www.barryadamson.com.
Well, probably www.centralcontrol.co.uk
Central Control, that's right.
/
Do a Google search. And also Barry's got a new tune on there, Rag and Bone, which I was listening to the other day. Very, very good. So thank you to Brad from Central Control International. Thanks to the Cinecity Film Festival. Thank you. Great pleasure to have Barry Adamson.
Thanks for coming along tonight. I really appreciate it. Cheers.